NASCAR certainly got a great headline with Chase Elliott, the sport's most popular driver, winning the Championship 4 race at Phoenix and also, of course, winning the championship because of it. However, things are not all sunshine, rainbows, and puppy dogs in NASCAR land right now, as the TV ratings for that championship race have just come out, and they're fairly disappointing. The season finale was down 18% from last year's race at the Homestead Miami Speedway, and that means the season at large is down 2%, though considering how much further the season finale dropped, it obviously could have been much worse for the entire season. Now, this is contrasted, and it's actually something absolutely fascinating, and really the reason I made this video. The low TV rating is contrasted by Chase Elliott's Day 1 championship merchandise sales being the largest NASCAR has seen in a decade. So how can this be? How can the sport appear on paper to be going down, and yet at the same time the sport's biggest star is able to churn out the biggest amount of sales in terms of merchandise that any driver has been able to do in nearly 10 years? And that includes drivers like Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Tony Stewart, many of the drivers that people blame for NASCAR's decline, their exit. Many people blame that. So in this video, we're going to talk about some factors that led to the drop in NASCAR's TV ratings this year. And we're also going to talk about what NASCAR is going to need to do going forward, because there are some things that NASCAR can do, particularly with the format at the end of the year, to boost ratings. There are obviously some things out of their control as well, and we'll talk about those, so let's get started. So we'll get the obvious factors out of the way first, and obviously the biggest one would be the COVID-19 pandemic. And ultimately, what we've seen with NASCAR in particular, but really all sports across the board, is that with people staying inside of their houses for 2 months in the spring, once those restrictions started to lift, people were less and less likely to stay inside and watch television. So certainly that's a major factor here in the decline of sports across the board. Hopefully, fingers crossed, when things start getting a little bit normal, you'll start to see TV ratings, if not go back to where they used to be, they'll at least, the curve will normalize, so to speak, and I hate to use a curve when talking about COVID, but that's what we have to do. That seems to be a major factor. There are also some things that are related to COVID that NASCAR does and does not have control over, but things that I think factored into some of the TV ratings losses over this year. I think the lack of practice and qualifying certainly hurt, and really that goes to a broader issue of lack of media coverage for the sport in general. These are things that I actually talked about back when the Indy 500 ratings absolutely tanked when they ran the race in August. And again, I can't necessarily blame NASCAR for being extremely proactive in how they managed this situation this year. Certainly don't want to go down that route. But looking at the limited amount of track time and the limited amount of media figures that were able to attend the race, photographers that were able to attend the race, the less track time means less television coverage, means less headlines, means less opportunities you're going to attract people to watch said race. That's something that I'm definitely scratching my head as to why NASCAR is kind of continuing that into 2021, especially late in the season when, by all accounts, many people think there's going to be a vaccine and likely the pandemic will be in its recessive state at that point. Keeping practice and qualifying away, I get it. It's also a sneaky way to do cost cutting. I think they're probably going to have to go back to having more track time, because it goes back to another point that I'm about to make, which is lack of investment from certain fans. And by investment, I mean, I would be very interested. I haven't looked at this data. I might look at this data, though, because I would wonder how much of a factor certain races not being able to host fans had in the NASCAR TV ratings and fans' investment in the product. Which is to say, if you wanted to go to, let's say, the race in Michigan, and you, for some reason, you couldn't go to the race in Michigan, let's say they're not allowing fans, would you be more or less likely to watch the rest of the season knowing that you really don't have to know much because, especially if you're a casual fan, well, I don't want to tune into the NASCAR race because I'm not going to a race anyway, and I don't necessarily feel I need to invest my time in that, especially the further we get into football season. It's like, oh, my football team is playing, I guess I'll watch them instead of the Cup race. I wonder if that had something to do with it, and that's another thing that I think may normalize as things hopefully get more normal as we continue into 2021. But I think it's an interesting factor, and it's something that I do want to look at data-wise maybe during this off-season. Because, and ultimately, again, it goes back to that media coverage thing too. If there's less media coverage, there's less people talking about it, there's less track time, and there's less people actually physically at the track to talk about it, to tweet about it, to Instagram about it. Those are less, that's a smaller number of people that potentially could influence someone's decision to watch a race and invest in it. I don't know. I could be completely barking at the wrong tree, but I think it's something to consider. The other factor, and this is one that I think NASCAR has a lot more control over, and I think they're going to not do anything this year, especially because of the result that they got. But I think they have to look at the format, the championship format. There was a lot of fan displeasure this year, and I have to tell you, as someone who could have watched some races, I did not watch all the playoff races by any stretch of the imagination. And I think there are a lot of people that felt the same way I did, which was just kind of like, meh. I just wasn't that invested in it this year, and I think a lot of people weren't. I think this format, while it does give you some awfully high highs every now and then, I think at the same time it kind of has that that wrestling term I sometimes bring up, which is hot-shotting the business. Sometimes when you expect everything to be crazy, it makes it less interesting when crazy stuff happens, and then it especially makes it less interesting when nothing happens and there's no fights and crazy crashes and all that stuff. The other problem, especially with the finale race, the Phoenix race, is that only the Final Four matter. And I think that's a major factor in some of the apathy we saw towards this particular championship race. And you know what? I'll put it this way. Let's say the legitimate result by many people's account happens, and Harvick, say, gets into the Final Four, and maybe Chase Elliott misses it. What do you think that TV rating would have been with all those Chase Elliott fans not seeing him on TV at all? And that seems to be what the Final Four is all about. I mean, we know there has been reported facts about NASCAR asking the other drivers, the other 36 drivers in the race, to not interfere with the championship four. So, in reality, we're watching a four-car race, and if, especially in NASCAR, where driver identity and fan identity with drivers matters so much, if you eliminate 36 potential viewership bases from really having a chance at winning the race, especially when their driver's not in contention for the championship, and they may actively hate some of the drivers in the championship race, having to hear about them all day and not be able to be treated to a race, I think that really hurts NASCAR, especially late in the season. The more the focus gets on those playoff drivers and the less focus there is on the actual racing itself, I think that is a turn-off more than it's a turn-on. And I think we're seeing that in the TV ratings as time goes on. I think less people are invested, less people are interested, and I would say there's a lot more people apathetic to the playoffs unless your driver has a really good chance. Again, this was an 18% drop. What would have happened if Chase Elliott had not been in that championship 4? It's a question. And I think a change is needed. Now, I wouldn't necessarily profess to know what change that is. But I think the data is fairly clear here. I think the market is eventually going to tell NASCAR what it needs to hear. The concern is that the TV contracts are coming up for NASCAR. They're going to need to be in a place to negotiate going forward. And as the sport operates right now, they meaning NASCAR and the tracks, earn a ton of money from TV contracts. The whole infrastructure of the sport is kind of based around that. If that money is significantly reduced going forward, what is the sport going to look like? What are the teams going to look like? What are the tracks going to look like going forward? So it's definitely important. And it's one thing that I would implore NASCAR to not ignore. Yes, you got Chase Elliott the championship. Yes, you're going to sell an awful lot of t-shirts, an awful lot of die-cast. But what happens next year when Denny Hamlin or Kyle Busch or somebody else wins the championship who maybe isn't quite as popular as Chase Elliott? And that TV rating goes from down 18% to down 36% or 40%. What happens then? And then you don't have the merchandise sales to back it up. So that's a little bit of a concern. I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsports content, and I will see you in the next video.